This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from An Expat's Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode. Today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of getting a permanent residence permit in Russia. Marcus, how about you start us off? What would you say is the first pro to getting a residence permit in Russia?
So the first thing that comes to mind, obviously for anybody in Russia on a visa, is that once you get residency, you don't have to go and get a new visa, whether that's a 3-month, 6-month, a year-long visa. No more of those trips abroad. You know, some people go to the Baltics or they have to go to their home country depending on their agreement. And it takes a lot of time. You're spending extra money on, flights and hotels while you're waiting for it. So really, you can just stay in Russia as long as you have the residence permit, and no more expenses kind of go out the window on those visa issues. The next pro is you can start a sole proprietorship.
Yeah, actually that's a great point. So if you're on a visa in Russia, you actually can't start a sole proprietorship in Russia. And we won't get into the details of why you might want to start one, but it is a more tax-friendly way to do small business in Russia. And again, if you have a residence permit, you have access to this. There's a simplified tax regime that applies to sole proprietors, and it's much easier to do small business that way. I think you can have up to 100 employees or something as a sole proprietor. So that's another great plus. If you're looking to do small business in Russia, getting a residence permit would make it a lot easier and more tax friendly.
Yeah, and just a quick note to add to that before we move to the next one, a small business, like if you're going to a cafe or maybe a language school or gym, if you look at the receipt when you pay for services, a lot of them will say IP, so sole proprietorship, on the receipt.
I mean, I noticed that, but never put two and two together. You're right.
There's so many businesses registered as a sole proprietorship. The next pro is you get access to free medical care. Now, arguably, the free medical care in Russia is, not at a high standard. So somebody with serious health issues probably wouldn't, look at this as a major pro. But if, routine medical care, you do have access to. So the next one is you can work anywhere in Russia.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest reasons why someone would want to get a permanent residence permit in Russia is that it gives them the freedom to work for any employer anywhere in Russia. There are some bureaucratic hurdles associated with moving your residence permit because you have to apply for it in a given place. If you're married, you have to apply for it where your wife is registered. But it is possible to move to another area of Russia once you've already gotten the permanent residence permit. But that freedom to work anywhere for any company is a huge, huge benefit for most expats who are living in Russia.
Right, and the last pro that we wanted to cover today is compared to Western countries like the US and the UK, Europe, hiring a lawyer to help you through this process of getting a permanent resident permit or temporary resident permit, any of these is very cost effective in that, you can have a lawyer help you, walk you through the whole process, make sure all the documents are correct.
Go to the appointments with the immigration authorities.
Right, and most of these lawyers will speak English. So, the prices are considerably, significantly lower than the US for sure, because the US application is...
Yeah, let's just put this into perspective. The cost to have a lawyer walk you through and do everything for you, which also includes the application fee in Russia, is lower than just the application fee in the United States. So we have people who reach out to us who need help with this, and they tell me that, $1,400 or $1,300, depending on what the exchange rate is a lot of money, and they don't want to spend that. And the alternative is waiting in line for days in Russia. But I always just like to think of it, if I were, when I came back to the US with my wife, it was more than that just to apply. So, but that's without any legal help, so you're on your own.
Right, and the last thing I wanted to say just about that is when you're coming from a Western country, you're thinking, okay, how bad can it be? If I go, even if I went with a translator, you go stand in line. We're talking about, standing in line for days and days and days and spending all day, every day, waiting to get this document, and you have to go jump around to different places. So we'll cover that in another video. The first con that we wanted to bring up is the process can take 4 to 6 months, and unlike in the US, for example, if you started in the US, you can stay until you finish it. But in Russia, if you're on a visa, like a 3-month visa, you can start the process. Let's say you're married to a Russian, you start the process of getting residency. You will have to go get another visa. So leave Russia, get another visa, come back, and then you can, pick up your card. And from that point, you can stay in Russia the whole time. The next con, Matt, is you must stay in Russia at least 6 months out of the year.
Yeah, so I actually just met a guy the other day, an American here in Houston at the Russian Visa Center, who wants to go to Russia. His wife has a green card in the US. He's trying to get a permanent residence permit in Russia, and he can apply for one. I was kind of telling him about the process, but they're in a position where he has to spend one more day than 6 months in Russia, and his wife has to spend one more day than 6 months in the United States. So for a lot of people, they want the freedom to go to Russia whenever they please, but if you get a residence permit, you actually have to stay there for more than half of the year, only by one day. And I've never heard of anybody getting hassled for spending only 6 months in one day. It's just, you have to be a resident, and if you're not a resident, then you're not entitled to have the permanent residence status. So just be aware, if you want to have a permanent residence permit, you are going to have to live in Russia. But once you apply for citizenship, obviously that requirement ends. But for those few years, depending on whether you're married or not, it's 3 to 5 years, you actually have to spend that time in Russia.
The next con is you have to report certain worldwide assets to the Russian tax authorities. Now, just the reporting alone is kind of tedious for foreigners. One, because it's all in Russian, so you might have to hire somebody to help you do it. And two, it's every year. So you do have to complete the Russian forms the Russian way and apply.
Real quick, I just want to mention that if you are an American living in any other country, you also have to report your Russian bank accounts to the United States. So, you become a permanent resident of Russia, you now have Russian tax obligations, but the US tax obligations that you had before that are also still applicable. So it becomes very, very complicated if you have a lot of different assets in different countries. Imagine if you have, you're an American who grew up in the UK, you have a house in the UK, something in the US, bank accounts in Russia, and then a bank account in Spain. I mean, you have to report all of this stuff to multiple countries, and it gets very complicated very fast.
Well, yeah, and we're not even talking about the next con yet, which is you have to pay Russian taxes on, as a resident, you have to pay Russian taxes. It's just the reporting that's kind of, the added issue. So the next con, you have to pay Russian taxes as if you were a resident in any country, right? You have to pay the taxes where you're living. Arguably, depending on where you're coming from, Russian tax rates are lower, and your country will most likely have a double tax treaty. So you're not taxed on certain incomes or investments twice, but that is another step that you have to go through.
Well, so I think the complication comes in when, there's two complications. One, if there's no double tax treaty, you could end up being taxed twice on something. The other complication is what is taxed first. Russia sees you as a tax resident. They want their money first because you're not a resident of that other country, even though you might be a citizen. So you get into very complicated scenarios very quickly if you're a resident of Russia and you have citizenship elsewhere with assets elsewhere. So just something to be aware of. If you're applying for a Russian permanent residence permit, you should probably have someone in your home country and in Russia who can help you navigate these issues, because if you get caught on the wrong side of these rules, you can end up out of Russia or even worse, so no one wants to go to jail because they didn't know the rules.
Right. And the last con on our list today is you have to report the countries that you have citizenship in or residency in. So wherever you have a residence permit or a second passport, or third or fourth. So you do have to report, I am a citizen or resident of these countries.
Right.
And that's fairly easy to do, but some people, don't necessarily want to do that. So anyway, that's our list of pros and cons for getting a Russian residency.
So if you have any comments or questions about getting a permanent residence permit in Russia, let us know in the comments. You can also find a contact email in the description below. If you need to find a lawyer in Russia to help you with this. We have a number of relationships with the top lawyers in Moscow who are helping foreigners with permanent residence permits. Let us know. We'd be happy to put you in touch. Most of them all do a free consultation. We'll see you in the next video.